Is 42 megapixels overkill for model photography? In this video, I want to kind of break down whether 42 megapixels for taking pictures of models or people is overkill. Is it too much? In my honest opinion, yes. I didn't buy this camera strictly for model photography. But I do a lot of model tests and this sort of stuff and agency work, and 100% of the time I think it's way too much. Purely based on the fact that these images are used on websites, they're used on model portfolios, social media, and all of this sort of stuff. So at that point, I think you could get away with a 12 megapixel camera. And that is all you'll ever need if you are just purely taking these sorts of photos. Let us talk about why I do have this camera. I do have this camera purely based on the fact that I do a lot more other work other than just model photography. But if I had my time again and this is all I was really kind of planning on doing, I think I would settle with a 24 to 26 megapixel camera. And I would be very, very happy with the results. Welcome back. My name is Kristian Eustace, and today we are talking about how many megapixels do you really need if you are doing more kind of portrait-based work and anything where you don't really have to deliver to commercial clients and anything like this. In my introduction, I did say 12 megapixels is more than enough for a model test, and yes, it really is. But if you do want to print anything bigger than A4 size sheet-ish, you do need a much better camera. 24 to 26, as I said, you'll be able to double that size. So an A3 is very plausible. A2. I think you'd be bordering between the A2 and the A3 size with that kind of size. With that many megapixels. So, you know, there's a caveat. How big do you really want to print something? Do you ever print it, or do you just upload it on social media? If you just upload it on social media, all you need is 2 megapixels and I'll be fine. Sorry. So model tests and portrait photography and all of this sort of stuff. You get a lot more versatility with a smaller sensor size. The amount of light that you require to take the same sort of shot is a little bit less based on, I'm not talking about the lens physics and all of this sort of stuff, the amount that you can boost your ISO, because you have got a lot smaller kind of, you've got a lot, your individual pixel can absorb more light and is a lot more efficient because your array has less pixels on it, so they are bigger. They can capture more than if you had a 42 megapixels versus a 24, for example. You're pretty much fitting nearly double the number of pixels on that array, and therefore you are sacrificing a lot on the size of those individual pixels. So how you take photos is very different, but it does mean that on a smaller camera, you are going to be able to caveat with ISO and this sort of stuff, and you're not going to end up with the amount of noise that you would do if you needed to take the same photo on a 42 megapixel sensor. That being said, I do love this camera, and 42 megapixel means that I get a great amount of ability to crop. And for me, who primarily uses prime lenses, it doesn't always mean that I have to take those 2 steps in to get that closer shot. It means that I can stand back, crop half the photo out, and it's still going to be more than sufficient for the use case on the day. So as I said, basically where the images are used at the end of the day is probably the most important thing when you're thinking about how many megapixels do you actually need? Like I said, 12 megapixels for model portfolios is actually the bare minimum, because models, they print out their books and it is A4 size kind of 90 to 100% of the time, really. So that 12 megapixels is kind of your lowest bracket, but working your way up there, quite a lot of agencies will send out these model portfolios and all of this sort of stuff as digital files to the client. So this is when the increase in megapixel actually becomes quite important, and 24 is all that you will ever really need. But when I've shot with the exact same equivalent camera, but it's not the R3, it was just the Sony Alpha III, I noticed that I get a lot more detail in the darks and the lights. In post-production, I can bring down those highlights quite a lot because there is a lot more information there. And I just didn't feel like I had that quite that versatility in what I can actually physically do with the camera. Okay, yes, I only used it for a few days, so I'm not an expert in this regard, but I noticed that I had a lot more flexibility, versatility, while taking the photo. Yes, okay. Over the last 6 years, I've learned to deal with this whole this light issue where I do need a certain amount of light, but I've caveated that in so many different ways in the past that it's not really something that I actually have to mentally think about. It's just something very, very natural to me now. And I found that when I was comparing the two images in post, and sadly I never took the same image because it was just basically I was taking a picture and then there was a sky and there were clouds in the photo. I would use the same settings that I would have done with this camera on the other camera, and I noticed that when I went to bring down those highlights in the post, they'd clipped so much that I didn't actually have the detail that I required. So I love this camera and I love the detail that you get from the more information based on your computer, but it is a lot more difficult to take that photo at the start. So if you are just starting out, I would suggest maybe, unless you want that really, really, really steep learning curve that I forced myself to go through, I would suggest 24 megapixels is everything that you ever need from basic commercial work. So I'm not talking about large firms here. I'm talking about your local restaurant needing pictures taken of their new menu for their website, or they wanted stuff printing out and putting on the wall. You're going to be able to do that with a 24 megapixel camera. That is absolutely fine. But as soon as you do want to increase the size dramatically, that is when you really, really need to think about actually upgrading to 42, 60 megapixels is all that you will ever need in your life. We can go into Hasselblad territory where we're talking about 100, 120 megapixels. This in itself is a different method of photography because it is medium format photography. You need a lot more patience, light, and know-how. You need that expertise and the confidence of what you are doing before you start thinking about going to such a large sensor, because there are issues that I found at 42 megapixels. I've used a 60 megapixel camera. It was the Fuji, I can't even remember the name now. I'll write it at the bottom of the screen for you. Beautiful, and I'll show you a couple of pictures from that now as well. But honestly, the difference between this lens combined with a macro and that 60 megapixels, honestly, even as I was pixel peeping, I wouldn't be able to tell you the difference. I have to admit the other lens wasn't a macro, so yes, okay, you've got a lot of advantages there, but sorry, I'm going off topic a little bit. Is 42 megapixels enough? Too much for model photography? In my honest opinion, yes. So what is the real cost of 42 megapixels? It's kind of on my wallet, if I'm honest. The real cost of 42 megapixels is the file sizes that it creates. Each individual raw file that I get from this camera is 80 megabytes. That means I have terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of storage for clients, because each one of these is 5 terabytes, by the way, except this one, this is 2. Backup. Each shoot costs me about 25 euros in storage. 20? Yeah, about 20 euros. If you're taking about 1,000, 1,500 photos, that is, okay, obviously if you're doing model tests or something like that, you're only taking 500 max. If you're taking anything more, you really need to think about what kind of photo and be more intentional with your photo. But obviously a topic for a different time. This is just really the cost of such a large sensor, and such a dense sensor is just it really racks up. These are my favorite. These are LaCie 5 terabytes HDD. Make sure you plug them in once a year and move some files around, otherwise you could corrupt them quite easily. But yeah, the 80 to 85 megabyte file sizes, that's really where it's going to hurt. So please take that into consideration, because that's not something I foresaw when getting that. The megapixel conversation in photography is a very common one. In my opinion, it's completely the wrong conversation to have. Is your current setup doing what you need it to do for what you are delivering for? If that's a yes, then the megapixel count does not matter. It really doesn't. Where it does matter is if you start going into a more commercial environment, more difficult clients, more clients that are expecting a little bit more and want the ability to crop or use it on a large scale while maintaining that resolution. So you really need to consider this when actually deciding whether 42 megapixels is enough. And don't forget about all of this. Anyway, my name is Kristian Eustace, and thank you for joining me today. 42 megapixels for model photography, way too much. Thank you.